This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here we have a circa 1941 Airline radio that was built by Belmont for Montgomery Ward. This radio's been sitting here for the longest time. The cabinet was coming apart on it, and I haphazardly glued it back together, and I did not do a very good job. I believe I've told you in previous videos that cabinetry is really not my forte. I just wish now that when my father passed away we had kept all of his clamps, because I'm finding out that clamps and wood glue are just as essential as a digital multimeter when it comes to these old things now. They're getting old and falling apart on us. Now, I think this has standard broadcast and short wave on it. As you can see, the back cover is missing. The loop antenna is just laying inside there. The speaker is missing. The tuning string is broken. That ought to be fun, trying to restring that. The chassis is a little rusty, but you know, it could be fixed. Well, let me tell you the story on it. It's been sitting here for years and I hadn't gotten to it by now, so I figured might as well get rid of it. So I advertised it on the Facebook marketplace and all of the Facebook baby clothes and cell phone pages for 15 bucks, just like it sits. I figured somebody might want it, if for no other reason than decoration. You know, a lot of these women that are into the country cutesy thing, I mean, is that still a thing? Is the country cutesy craze still a thing, or is that passe now? Heck, I don't know. But yeah, this is the kind of radio you'd see on display at Cracker Barrel, where, you know, they don't care if it works or not, they just want it for display purposes. So I put it on Facebook Marketplace for 15 bucks, thinking somebody'd just rush right over here and buy the thing. Well, the first two messages I got were from a couple of really cute girls, and they just wanted to buy this thing, and I mean, they were really cute too. But when somebody contacts me wanting to buy something, the first thing I do is look at their Facebook profile, and if it's a skeleton profile with nothing on it, or if the activity that I see on that profile looks sketchy, as in someone that I might not want coming to my house, then they automatically go on the block list. Well, concerning those two girls, one of them was a skeleton profile, and the other one, whenever I would try to click to view their profile, it said this information is not available right now. So both of those got ignored and blocked. Well, then this man contacts me, this guy contacts me, and he acts real interested. And he says, can I come by tomorrow afternoon and get it? I said, sure. So I sat here all Friday afternoon waiting on him. He didn't show up. Later in the day, he sent me a message and said, oh, I got busy. Can I come by tomorrow and get it? I said, yeah, you can come by tomorrow. Well, by this time I'm getting irritated because I waited on him and, you know, he didn't show up. So I said, yeah, you can come by tomorrow. Well, all day Saturday rolls around and he didn't show up again. So by that time I'd had enough of him, and he got added to the block list, which seems to get longer and longer every time I list something for sale. I have an idea that he probably didn't want to buy anything in the first place. He was just wanting to yank me around. So I just took the radio down and said the heck with it. We might try to resurrect it just to get it to play, and then I don't know what we'll do with it after that. But you know, when I list something for sale for 10 or 15 bucks, it shouldn't be no bull crap hassle. I list it for sale, you come look at it, you buy it, you leave, everybody's happy. But the thing is, today, so many people, they don't want to come to your house. They want to meet in a public place somewhere. Well, since I don't drive, that's a problem, and it usually entails me having to get someone to give me a ride, which usually involves my mother. And there's been times she's taken me to meet people only to have them not show up at all or to be extremely late. And after the last time, her words were, and I quote, "If these people want to come buy this shit you're selling, they can come to the house and get it. I'm not taking you to go meet somebody in a parking lot and then them not show up." And I said, well, I couldn't agree with you more on that. So if they want something of mine, they come here and get it. I have the item outside where they don't have to come inside. They look at it, they buy, they leave. And like I said, if it's somebody that I don't feel comfortable with, then I don't even talk to them. They just automatically get blocked. And on the note of the cute girls, fellas, if you're having social life problems, if women are not giving you the time of day, then just list something for sale on Facebook Marketplace. They'll be falling all over you then. But on a serious note, I know of someone who fell for one of those scams. I don't know exactly the details of how he connected with her, but you know, he was one of those that never had luck with the ladies, but always wanted to be in a relationship, but it just never happened. And he connected with somebody on Facebook, and they were talking, and first thing you know, she's giving him this story about, oh, well, I'd love to come spend the fantasy weekend with you, but my grandfather has cancer and I'm having to take care of him, and all my money's going towards him, and I just can't afford the plane ticket. If you can wire me $300 and you know, I'll come spend a fantasy weekend with you and make all of your dreams come true. Well, he stupidly sent her the $300 or however much it was, and as you might expect, she never showed up. In all actuality, this girl was probably some fuzzy old man somewhere that was probably talking to 50 other guys at the same time, and you know, just hoping he could get a few of them that were thinking with the wrong head. I'm trying to be polite here, if you know what I mean. But anyway, enough rambling on about female scam artists and Facebook Marketplace ding-dongs who play games and who want something for nothing. Let's get this thing apart and see what it takes to get it to play. Alright, here's the underside of the chassis. I can see that there's been some possible repair work performed, but not in recent years, and it doesn't look to be too slopped up, so that's a good sign. Alright, we've already determined that the speaker is missing. Now we need to determine if this uses a PM speaker or an electrodynamic speaker. It does appear that the audio output transformer is mounted to the chassis, and that's a good thing, so I don't have to worry about finding one of those. There's the speaker plug on the chassis, which is no big deal. We can just run some wires through the plug holes and solder them to the socket underneath here. Okay, this orange filter capacitor looks like a tack end. Down here is the original 2-section cap that we know is dead by now, and most likely this replacement is too. Okay, we have our 1942 edition of the Most Often Needed Radio Diagrams book. I have a good many of these that I bought over the years. They were published from 1938. Well, the first one contained radios from, I believe, 1926 through 38. Then you had 39, 40, 41, and 42. Then there were no volumes published during the war years. And then they picked up in 46 and went through 66, and then the final volume was 67 through 69. And by that point, radios, for the most part, had pretty much became a disposable item, pretty much like TVs eventually became. And I've been trying to pick up as many of the hard copies of these as I can find, and I need to start looking for the old rider manuals. I've got a few of them, but not very many. Yes, I know you can get this stuff online, but there's some issues with that. A lot of the scans online are very hard to read, and I know you shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth, but you know, when you can't read it very well, you can't read it very well. That's just the way it is. And also, what if I find myself in a position where I don't have internet access, especially if I get tired of paying the $93 a month that Comcast wants and decide to have it turned off? Then I'll need the printed volumes to get radio schematics. Of course, if that ever happens, there won't be any more YouTube videos, but oh well. But anyway, let's turn to page 73, I believe, and see what we got. Alright, here's the schematic. This is a 7-tube set. We have a 12SJ7 mixer, and then we have a 12J5 as an oscillator, a 12SK7 IF amplifier, a 6T7, which is our detector tube, and for some reason they call it a gas gate. That's a new one on me. 12SQ7 first audio amplifier, and a 35L6 audio output tube, and then a 35Z5 rectifier. And looking at this schematic, it looks like this radio chassis was subject to come with either a PM speaker or an electrodynamic speaker. You see they have the outline of a field coil there, which means that this set could have been used with either a PM speaker with a resistor where the field coil would have been, or an electrodynamic speaker that used a field coil as the filter choke. Well, whatever it used, if it doesn't have a resistor, it's going to get a resistor because we'll be using a PM speaker in this set. An R14 is a 1.2K 1 watt resistor, which in this application we can go with anything between a 1K and a 1.5K. Shouldn't be a problem at all. And the main capacitors that you generally have to replace, even for a resurrection, besides the electrolytic filter capacitors, is this C20 here, which is the plate to grid coupling capacitor between the first audio tube and the audio output tube. That capacitor is guaranteed to be leaky by now, and when it becomes leaky, it passes DC from the plate of the first audio tube to the control grid of the output tube, which drives the tube to full conduction, and which over time will destroy the tube as well as impair the audio quality. The other capacitor we have to worry about is this one. Is that C17? I can't quite make it out, but that capacitor is across the AC power line, and its purpose is noise suppression. Well, those capacitors tend to short and blow apart and send shrapnel everywhere, so oftentimes when resurrecting a set, I'll just cut that one out and not even worry about it. Okay, measuring across the terminals on the speaker plug. Across the two wide terminals we get about an ohm or a little less. It keeps bouncing around, probably because we're not making good connection. So that should be the secondary of the audio output transformer, so at least we know that's good. Now let's measure across the two narrow pins and see what we get. Alright, make contact, quit fooling around now. Alright, 8K and rising, so that tells us that we don't have a resistor under here. That looks like we're just reading across the other elements in the circuit, and the increasing resistance is the old dried out filter capacitor slowly charging. So yeah, we need to put about a 1.2K resistor across these two narrow pins, and then the two wide pins can connect straight to our speaker voice coil. Okay, looking closely underneath, it looks like the 1200 ohm resistor was already in place, it just wasn't connected across these two pins, so apparently this used a PM speaker from the factory. Here's an old cheapo 4-ohm 4-inch Chinese speaker that came out of something that will be good enough for this resurrection. And now I want to take my ohm meter and measure across the power plug and see if I get any resistance. And if we do, that will confirm that the off-on switch and the tube heater string is intact. Okay, we get something, but it's 1.7 meg and rising, so that tells us we have an open tube filament, and that resistance we're getting is most likely that across the line capacitor that is leaky as all get out and needs to be cut out and replaced. Well, I found part of the trouble is this power cord. As you can see, the end of it is kind of crusty looking, like it's been in some moisture. And reading across this side of the line, we read 130 whatever ohms, if this meter will stay cooperative. 136 ohms. However, the other side of the cord reads 3 ohms, which is more acceptable. So what I'm going to do is just whack off this old plug and put another plug on, and that ought to take care of that problem. However, when I read across the line capacitor, I still read about, well, I'm reading about, it starts out at about 4.8 K and gradually rises, so that capacitor is leaky. But we still have an open in this heater string somewhere, because if we didn't, we would read a much lower resistance than 4.8 K. Okay, it looks like our trouble is the tap on the rectifier tube filament or heater is blown open, and that usually indicates that something in the radio shorted and drew too much current and blew the tap on the filament. So what I'm going to do for resurrection purposes is we're just going to jump out the tap. That'll mean we won't have any dial light, but the rectifier tube should still work. But before we apply power, we need to try and find out what possibly shorted and took this tube out. Okay, I'm going to check from the cathode of the rectifier, which is where the output is, where the B plus comes off of and goes into the first filter capacitor. We're going to check between that and B minus, our circuit ground, and see what we get. Now this is still not very conclusive, because an ohm meter test on something like this may reveal something that does not seem shorted. However, when voltage hits a component such as a capacitor, it could short out and rear its ugly head. But let's just see what we have anyway. Alright, 8 meg ohms and rising. So yeah, that's pretty high. Nothing really seems to be dead shorted, but those filter capacitors are shot, because if they were good, it would have gone to a much lower resistance and then climbed back up. Okay, here are the old electrolytics. Here's the original multi-section capacitor, 40 and 220s, all three at 150. And then this tacked on thing that somebody just did the typical hack it in and go job, just lay the capacitor lead on top of the terminal and put a blob of solder on it, and that's it. Heat it up and it just falls off. And all of these are bad. They read way up in the meg ohms, and like I said, if these were good, they would start out at a lower resistance and then gradually climb back up. So these definitely need to be replaced. Okay, we now have our new filter caps in place, and I jumped across the burned out tap on the rectifier tube. Now let's see what we have in the way of resistance across the heater string. 115 ohms. That's more like what I can live with. So it's about to be dark 30 for today, so we need to clean up our mess, and then tomorrow we will get back on this. And we have this Crosley record player sitting out here. This is an older one from 2002. It's a better one than a lot of the later ones, but that's still not saying a whole lot. At least this one has a full-size platter and a rubber mat and automatic return on the tone arm. Where they blew it was using little 3-inch speakers here when they could have used much bigger speakers. And I don't think the amplifier impedance is right for this cartridge, which means you get very little bass. And of course the 3-inch speakers don't help out in that regard either. I also don't like the fact that the power transformer is energized at all times. They should have had the AC switched, so when you turn it off here it is really off. This is one I tried to sell on the Facebook baby clothes and cell phone pages and got no worthwhile responses. And the replies I did get was from the general variety of flakes and no-shows. So yeah, I'm going to give this one more shot, and if it don't disappear pretty quick, it's going to be the result of it's going to be the subject of an EOL video.
Sipping yak only, and security ain't talking about nothing. They be kissing when they kick them out something.
As you can tell, this thing sounds rather tinny. I thought about making some improvements to this, as in installing some larger speakers and making some circuit modifications to the amplifier that would improve its performance vastly, but then I got to thinking, why bother? You know, I could do all that to it and still couldn't sell it. And I've basically determined that the average member of the general public, they don't care about decent sound quality. They're used to hearing tinny sounding audio on their cell phones, so they've been conditioned to believe that that's what everything is supposed to sound like. So like I said, I'm gonna try one more time to move this. If it doesn't move pretty quick, then it's going to go out in a blaze of glory. I remember back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when these were marketed on QVC for a ridiculous amount of money. Back then, that was before the quote-unquote vinyl revival took off. I think at that point, these types of tabletop record players were made to look like a 1940s table model phonograph, and they were marketed to senior citizens who just wanted something to play their Reader's Digest and Longines Symphonette box set records on, and to remind them of the way things were decades before. There really wasn't any quality to speak of put into these. Your 1940s tabletop phonograph would have been much better made. The only disadvantage is the one from the 40s would have most likely been 78 RPM only, so you couldn't have played your Reader's Digest and Longines Symphonette box sets on those. Alright, back to the Airline. I cleaned all the pots and the band switch, and we just have it fired up. We're going to juice this. No isolation transformer, no variac, no dim bulb tester, and if it blows up, then it just does. And do we have any tube illumination? I don't think so. Wait a minute, yes, we do have some illumination. And I hear the weakness of a radio station coming through. Now, this tuning condenser is dirty. No surprise there. Very garbled, distorted audio, and I bet I know what that is. Alright, let's look at the control grid of the output tube. Holy crap, 15 volts. Yeah, we better turn that off very quick before we cremate that output tube. So that capacitor is very leaky. And of course, with that capacitor being so leaky that it's causing such a positive voltage to appear on the control grid of the output tube, then that's just making the tube conduct full on, which means it's drawing more current, which means it's lowering the B plus voltage substantially. I can tell you that much without even measuring the B plus voltage. So we're going to get this capacitor out of here and put something in there that's in good shape, and it ought to make the radio happier. Looking closely, I see that this is one of those 2 for the price of 1 capacitors, as in 2 capacitors in the same package. Okay, so one cap connects between the plate of the first audio tube and ground here. That's a .0002, I believe. I need to enlarge that to make sure I'm looking at it correctly. That's your RF bypass to strip any RF that might be on the plate of this tube off to ground. And then the other capacitor, which looks like a .02, that will be your coupling capacitor that couples between the plate of the first audio tube and the control grid of the audio output tube. Okay, a .022 for the coupling capacitor and a 250 Mickey Mouse for the RF bypass. That's the closest thing I had, and that will work just fine. Now, if you run into a set with these dual capacitors, then I would suggest having a schematic for your radio, especially if you're not familiar with the circuit, because I've seen radios where someone would go in and replace the dual capacitors, and they either use the wrong values because they were confused about what value went where, or they would just install the capacitors completely wrong in the circuit. So if you don't know, consult a schematic and make sure you're right before you go doing something that might end up being wrong and causing you to chase your tail for the next week. Okay, that made it much happier, and I think it's slightly off the station. Alright, let's see what we have on the control grid this time. That's much better. Basically 0 volts. Alright, I changed it to a station. It won't get me a copyright strike.
Bandwagon fans, but nobody doesn't have fans.
It still distorts like crazy at high volume.
It's... You don't want to... You hate it when people say ramps don't have any fans.
And turning our tone control to the extreme bass position pretty much kills it, which is probably due to another leaky capacitor.
Because you got a dude now, right? You got a dude at...
Okay, in this set, the tone control circuit is a little different than in some. On most, the tone control is on the plate of the output tube. However, in this set, it's on the control grid of the audio output tube. One side connects to the control grid, the other side connects to ground. That serves as your grid bias resistor for the output tube, and then they have a capacitor between the center of that pot and ground, and that's what establishes your tonal qualities. And then on the output side, on the plate side, we have another capacitor between plate and ground that will also help shape your tonal qualities and provide additional bypass to keep any kind of oscillation from taking place in the output tube that might be a result of any RF being present. And that capacitor is bad about shorting, and when it does, it could burn open the audio output transformer. So I'll probably just replace that and this tone condenser just for good measure. And our distortion could be caused by this coupling capacitor on the volume control. If it becomes leaky, it will upset the bias on the 12SQ7 and cause the distortion that we were experiencing at high volume. So probably go ahead and get rid of that one too. Okay, there's our tone control capacitor, 0.0068 connected between the wiper of the tone control and ground. So let's fire the radio back up and see if we have better tone control action now. Okay.
Goodbye. See you later. Go figure it out yourself. They have no quarterback.
Yes, it does have better tonal range now. It doesn't quite kill it.
I think it was always a 2 or 3 year thing, you know? It was always a... And guys that left that, why aren't they prepared then, Doug?
While we have that volume control coupling cap loose, let's check this grid bias resistor for the first audio tube. It's a 5 meg. Sometimes they'll go way up in value and cause above average distortion at higher volume levels. So let's just see what we have here. We have 9 meg. So yeah, I think we probably better go ahead and change that resistor while we're at it. Okay, there's the volume control coupling capacitor and the grid bias resistor. I didn't have a 4.7, so I had to go with a 6.8 meg. That's still better than the almost 10 that the original had drifted up to, and it should work just fine. Now let's see if we have audio distortion at top volume.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's a shared, shared mess there. I think part of it was Baker.
It does, but not to the degree that it did before. These amplifiers generally distort at high volume, but like I said, it's to the degree that I would expect now. Alright, there's our plate bypass cap for the output tube. The leads on it weren't long enough, so I had to tack it on over here. If and when I ever fix this correctly, I will correct that. If not, well, then the other guy who gets this can just fix it. And here's the RF line bypass capacitor tacked in. We're going to turn it on, and if it plays, which I hope it does, then that's probably going to be about all the resurrection that we're going to do to this set. You know, in order for it to be right, all these other paper capacitors need to be replaced. The 35Z5 needs to be replaced. I'm sure the dial bulb is burned out as well. All the resistors need to be gone through and checked, and any out of spec ones need to be replaced. And then the alignment needs to be performed to get the maximum sensitivity out of this set. But for right now, this is probably about all the resurrecting I'm going to do to this. Oh yeah, and the dial cord needs to be restrung, and I don't even have any dial string right now. I need to get some of that heavy duty nylon fishing line for such a purpose. But yeah, I think if this radio was properly restored, it would be a dynamite performing radio. In fact, it motivates me to try to find one that's in better condition, and all there is in having the correct speaker and cabinet in a little bit better shape and all that good stuff. Chassis not rusted.
It has all come together really well for the league. This is going to be a ridiculously priced Super Bowl, but
rescues some pounds of good food that would have gone.
Mark Davis today and introduced. Coach addressed the elephant in the room that's called.
Brought to you by Feeding America.
Before the interview
And the battery's about to die, so this is as good a place as any to call it a day.